commitment to Te Reti o Waitangi. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. Following on from the member Marion's thread, I definitely hope we don't have to wait 479 years to finally get our constitution, to get our house in order. Because, Mr Speaker, this bill is a relic of the past. It's an anachronism. It's a too little, too late measure by the monarchy. It's a relic of the past, Mr Speaker, and it's high time that New Zealand moved on. We're like that stereotypical kid, that 30-year-old who's still living at home. It's time for New Zealand to leave the parents' house, get a flat on our own, maybe get some furniture of our own. Sure, it's a bit cruisy at home. You don't have to pay the bills. Maybe you don't even have to do the washing. But it's time to move out of home. It's time to stand on our own 2 feet. So, Mr Speaker, I'm rising to abstain on the Royal Succession Bill. Mr Speaker, I'm quite happy and proud to be abstaining on this bill because I cannot vote for a bill which enshrines discrimination, Mr Henry. I cannot vote for a bill which the Labour Party said was a shuddering horror. I cannot vote for that. But I'm also not going to vote against modernising and ending sexist discriminatory practices, which is what we've seen for hundreds of years under the discriminatory monarchy. So what the Greens have decided to do is to abstain against this bill. What we'll be doing is not voting for discrimination, but we're not voting against the modernisation of a discriminatory institution. So I think what we've seen is a hornet's nest of interjections take off from the both sides of the House. But, Mr Speaker, I want to get to the substance. So we want to acknowledge the bill does do some good things. It is a modernising bill, allows female firstborns to take the throne. It reduces the limit of the list of which the monarch can limit heirs from marrying, dating back from 1772, I understand. But, Mr Speaker, the Greens, as I've outlined, will be abstaining against it. We can't support discrimination, but we're not opposing a modernisation process. We'd challenge other people, and I'd like to be there on the barricades with Andrew Little.
That's right. So you should leave.
An abstention is a... Mr Henry, an abstention is a perfectly legitimate parliamentary vote. And, Mr Speaker, what I would prefer is if members had voted for Keith Locke's referendum on the Head of State bill, what we could be having is an actual conversation about where do we go forward. Because this is a relic, it's an anachronism, and I don't think the member should be voting for such an old-fashioned discriminatory institution. Mr Speaker, this bill is quite simply too little, too late. The entire institution is corrupt. It's inside, it's an institution which has no place in 2013. It's simply incredible that we're finally getting rid of that sexist discriminatory primogeniture rule, which has been around for hundreds of years. In 2013, we've seen women's liberation for decades in New Zealand, and this Parliament and the other 16 realms that also have to pass this legislation are only getting around it now. It's a discriminatory institution, and that's why I can't support it. What New Zealanders, I believe, particularly the younger generation, is they want to see a Kiwi head of state. And what this bill does is discriminate against New Zealanders, because what we're seeing is an English head of state for New Zealand. She's called the Monarch of New Zealand, but as we saw with the Iraq War, where Britain went to war and we didn't, she was the monarch of Britain, not New Zealand, representing our interests abroad. Mr Speaker, this is a monarch that's only been in New Zealand, I understand, around 10 times, lives a fundamentally different life to New Zealanders. I think we should end the discrimination and allow a New Zealander to be our head of state. Secondly, this bill discriminates against Roman Catholics, which we have seen in this debate. And when you look around this chamber, it's not the old relics like Toe Henry that's the only relic in this chamber. We've got relics like the mace, we've got relics like the iconography of the monarchy. The prayer we start, again, is an Anglican prayer, and it's time to ditch that discriminatory, sectarian way we start our parliament. We should have a way that all members of all faiths or non-faiths can feel comfortable with. This bill clearly discriminates against Catholics because the monarch cannot be a Catholic, has to be part of the Anglican faith. It's fascinating watching the religious schisms from the Protestant Revolution still shaping our laws in 2013 and our constitutional arrangements. Lastly, while it's a modernisation and improvement that the monarch doesn't have to personally approve, literally hundreds of marriages between potential future heirs, the limit's only been limited to 6, but plainly and simply what we're seeing is arranged marriage. And this is why I cannot vote for a bill which contains arranged marriage. I think it's egregious and should not be enshrined in New Zealand or Commonwealth law. But all in all, Mr. Speaker, all in all, I'm not going to, Mr. Speaker, I know it's the last day of the year, but I'm going to try and ignore some of that inane interjections. Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is our constitutional arrangements. And what I want to see is a proud, independent New Zealand going into the future with confidence. I don't want to see a New Zealand which looks to the past. I heard the member Scott Simpson say we're a young country, when in reality we're the 4th oldest parliamentary democracy in the world. We should be proud of our institutions, but it's time, like that stereotypical adult child, to be leaving home to go get our own house. I think New Zealanders want an independent head of state who's a New Zealander, who grew up in a country like them, that knows about the country's history, can represent New Zealand values on the world stage. It's time for New Zealanders to feel proud about a treaty-based, inclusive democracy that doesn't have a head of state living on the other side of the world, that very rarely travels here, that knows very little about our day-to-day life. Mr. Speaker, it's time that we listen to the people of New Zealand and had a genuine debate around the treaty. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a member who supports the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as our founding document, I want to see that enshrined in our constitutional arrangements. For too long, the relationship between the Crown and iwi in the treaty has been used as an excuse to not see action. Many petitions over the decades have gone to Westminster to see the Queen, and quite appropriately for our constitutional arrangements under the 1947 Statute of Westminster, the Queen has referred iwi petitioners to the New Zealand Parliament. The Crown and New Zealand statute is enshrined in the monarch's representative, the Governor-General, and the House of Representatives. This is the Crown. If we're going to proceed into the future as a proud multicultural nation which sees the treaty at the heart of our constitutional arrangements and political government, what we need to do is ditch that chimera that the Queen is somehow representing the relationship. For 60 years, she's battered those questions back to New Zealand. What I want to see is a true treaty-based parliament. Now, we've got that old upper house chamber. I'd love to see a treaty house of parliament. And what we haven't seen in this debate, what we haven't seen in the constitutional debate set up by the government, are fundamental questions. How do we embrace a treaty nation? Now, while Tau Henry isn't the only relic we see in this chamber, it's high time for New Zealand to go into the future with confidence. It's time to change some of this archaic iconography around this house. It's time to change our flag, time to change our constitutional arrangement. It's time to see a Kiwi as the head of state, a Kiwi representing New Zealand, a Kiwi doing us proud, and a Kiwi that New Zealanders can vote for. We don't want a monarch on the other side of the world. We want a new flag. We want a more fair, democratic, less discriminatory constitutional arrangement. New Zealanders want a proud, independent nation who stands on the world stage as a proud, independent nation, representing ourselves, not a monarch on the other side of the world. That's the future, Mr. Speaker. It's my vision for New Zealand, a future that all New Zealanders can participate, not just a discriminatory anachronism, a too late relic of the past enshrined in this bill. Kia ora. That's great fun.
I call the Honourable Kate Wilkinson.
I am proud